And if you could hit the next slide for me, or actually I got it. There we go. So welcome everybody. Thank you for the time this afternoon. I'm glad to speak with you about our journey through the PPM development and our journey with PROJILITY. Today I'll be talking a little bit about SE Grocers or Southeastern Grocers and what the IT PMO does here. And then we'll be talking about PROJILITY and our journey with them and then where we're headed. And you see here on my tagline, we're delivering the organization strategy. So everything that we do is really in the eye of the organization and focusing on to making those deliverables happen. So a little bit about myself. As mentioned, I am the director of the IT project management group here at Southeastern Grocers. In my career, I am a passionate project manager. I live that through and through in my day-to-day, as well as my home life and work life. I believe that making the world easier through making a plan and working the plan. If you have those things, you tend to go pretty well. As far as my experience, I've been in project leadership for 10 years. I have direct project management execution practice for 5 years, and I'm a technologist by trade. I've been a desktop technician, a network technician, as well as a server administrator. So I've worked in technology my entire career. As for project management, I personally really grabbed onto it when I was going through my Eagle Scout project when I was a teenager. At the end of each project, you have to report what you did, how you've accomplished it, and I really latched onto the practices of project management. So you can say that project manager all the way back through my teens. And if anybody's interested in connecting with me, you can certainly hit my LinkedIn at the bottom there and connect with me at any time. A little bit about Southeastern Grocers and the IT PMO. We are 38,000 associates across 500 stores in the Southeastern US. We have 1,000 corporate associates and 300 IT associates, and that's a mix of FTEs and contractors, about 70% and 30% respectively. My team consists of 7 project managers, and we work directly or primarily with the IT and the corporate space. We do some work with the store managers and the stores associates on the footprints themselves, but we do stick more towards the corporate environment. A little bit about our portfolio. We have an average of about 35 active projects at any time. We have about 8 in the queue at any given time as well, going through approval processes, funding needs, etc. And then we do an annual planning of about 50 projects. So we do incremental projects throughout the year, as well as a full portfolio planning of about 50. The total portfolio value is about $25 million that we manage, both capital and expense. Prior to Project Web Access and prior to working with PROJILITY, we had a number of issues that we had needed to overcome. When I joined Southeastern Grocers, we had inconsistent project plans. Some people were using Excel, some were using spreadsheets, some had them on a checklist. Yes, we even had sticky notes. We had an inability to locate project documentation. We had people that were using Teams, SharePoints, personal drives, and if you know also enough about Microsoft that if they're on personal drives and someone leaves the organization, we had data that was missing because their SharePoints or their personal drives were deleted. So we had a problem in retention. We had the inability to see a project timeline. We had the spreadsheets, but unless we were really getting into deep dive Excel features or Smartsheet features, we didn't have a good Gantt view. We didn't have a good program or portfolio view. So we needed to be able to pull that together and understand where we were going as an organization. Statusing and status reports were inconsistent as well. We actually had 5 different status reports. We needed to consolidate that into one standardized format that was predictable, that everybody could read at a glance and understand what to look for and what to look to. We had no roadmaps, so we actually had 4 different programs that had duplicated information between each other. We had a number of different activities happening, and we had no clear view of what's happening, when's it happening, and how are we avoiding some of the issues that we may be having from a portfolio or project execution perspective. Additionally to that, we had minimal resource planning. So we knew who was working on projects, but it was more on feeling on whether we reached capacity. We could look at people and see the tiredness in their eyes, or we can see where they couldn't attend certain meetings because of conflicts, but we couldn't articulate to our business partners or to our individual groups what we were facing from a resource planning perspective. And then timekeeping itself, again, proving where we were spending time or understanding how people were allocated. It was very cumbersome with an archaic PPM tool we had. The tool we had not been upgraded in 10 years and actually needed a kick to really figure out where we needed to go. So as you see on this slide, what did we need? We needed something better. clearly said. So we needed to engage with PROJILITY and to really put in a PPM tool that was going to work for us. And that ended up being Project Web Access. In our journey with PROJILITY, as far as a timeline here, we signed with them in October of 2022. We ended up kicking off right before the holidays, or in the midst of the holidays in 2022, and then going live in February. Speaking to PROJILITY themselves, they've been a great partner for us. They were willing to entertain all my crazy requests and timelines, even against some of their advisement, if I could say that a little tongue in cheek, because they were trying to make sure that we had an excellent implementation, which we did have a great implementation. But I was very eager, as you can tell on the previous slide, to get going and to build a better process for us. We did go with a bare bones implementation. One of the big things I was going for was out of the box, minimal customization, because I wanted to launch and get something that's going to help me get the portfolio in line. So we worked with or implemented Project Web Access. We did the Teams and SharePoint connectors so that we could have a central repository for documentation, but depending upon how people like to use the system, they could use either Teams or SharePoint. And then we implemented, as mentioned earlier, the Hammerhead product from PROJILITY. And I'll say those reports have been instrumental in highlighting where we are in our portfolio. And you'll see some of those even in my own presentation here. From a lessons learned perspective, I kept saying out of the box, out of the box, out of the box. Come to find out, PWA is not exactly out of the box ready to go. You do have to understand what you're asking for and what you're going to get out of the back end. You have to do some customizations. You have to build out some of those reports and those fields and those features. But to it, you can still get from a pretty light load if you want to get started pretty quickly. But do recognize that understand your timeline and what you're asking for in that timeline and what you'll get out of it. Additionally, moving people from Excel spreadsheets and smart sheets, the curve was pretty steep for our PMs, resources, and resource managers. Specifically on that, moving PMs from an Excel sheet where they could just enter in lines to a resource plan and predecessor-driven Gantt chart project plan that needed to be filled out. They had to go through a whole education on that, which again is where we needed to be, but it was quick because when we turned it on, we needed to get there fast. And then from resources and resource managers was understanding allocations, what it looked like, how did that influence other projects, where were the collisions, what was their true capacity, because you had a feeling of what your people were working on, but now let's look at what they're actually working on. And then ensure you have a PWA or a Power BI analyst. You can certainly support it yourself if you're a small enough group and nimble enough. But when you need enough information or you need more added, understanding that connection between Project Web Access and Power BI and that reporting aspect is definitely beneficial, and having somebody who can help field the questions through that education curve is something that we definitely needed. And then again, heavy on-site into organizational structure and resource planning. Knowing your organizational breakdown structure is imperative. It really drives how timesheets are done. It drives how your resource planning is done. It drives a lot of that context. So make sure you have that in place beforehand if you're getting into this product. As far as where we are now, we've gone quite a long ways. We've got project plans that are standardized. So now we have an 80-line template. As soon as we create a project, it's already there for them. We already have some of the roles specified of what's needed to happen. And then additionally, we've also, because everybody's financial focused, we already built in the financial flags for each type of task. So we've categorized them expense or capital so that people don't have to worry about that. And if they add a custom or an additional task, then they have to worry about it. But at least 80 lines of the project plan already has that definition. As a tip or trick, we did remove the predecessors. That would allowed us to be a little more nimble as we build the plan out and we get things aligned, because every plan is unique. So as we get things lined up, you may have to modify who's got those plans or where that predecessor is connected to or something of that nature. So just a little tip or trick, don't over bake your template, but provide them a good starting point. From a roadmap perspective, the first one here on the left side is what I use for portfolio management. And this is a report out of Hammerhead. We've modified it slightly to give us a little more detail than what natively came out of the package, but it's still fairly intact. But this gives me an overall view of what's in flight, what do our Gantt charts look like from an overall timing perspective. It tells me how many items are in the program, how many are active, how many are on hold. Additionally to that, you can see at the bottom, I can look at all the radials and conditions of those reports. as well as seeing how much is spent, when they're due, even planned hours versus actual hours. So I can see how we're trending towards those overall expenses, or if we're burning a little fast, if I can look at the end date and see where things are happening. And then in the lower right-hand corner, for leadership reporting, similar format, but a little bit different, all the same. You have a Gantt chart, but we also have the project listing themselves, start finish dates, but it's a little bit different view in quarter format so that they can understand what's happening. We don't put the radials on there because they just don't find that as valuable. I want to make sure that things are just on track and moving forward. So again, you can build multiple reports with the same data set to get the mission and the message across. From a timekeeping perspective, one of the native reports out of Hammerhead is the timesheet compliance report that we have here that allows us to look back from week to week to see whether everybody's timesheets are and whether they're approved, submitted, in progress, or they haven't created them yet. And we have additional filters around the timesheet managers or the departmental team, because of course those can be two different people, but this allows us to slice and dice that content so that we can see which timesheets are outstanding, which ones are done, or even identify if there may be a challenge with someone in particular, and we need to highlight them or understand what's happening with their timesheets. And the bottom below is a trend that's coming out of that report. We're able to look at our goal that we set, which is a 90% compliance each week, week over week for IT, and we're able to identify each week how much we get done, right? So you see a lot of in the 80s. We did set an aggressive goal for 90% for a group of 300 people. And part of that, right, we knew we weren't going to get 100% because people are on PTO, they're sick, they do forget periodically, but we wanted to set something that, again, more information helps us plan better. So if we can get to that 90th percentile and understand where our resources are spending time, then we can plan better going forward or adjust plans if we need to. Speaking a little further into how we're using the resourcing output, and all these reports are in Power BI. From a resourcing utilization perspective, you can see here we're able to paint a picture from an entire organization perspective. We're able to talk to our business partners and say we spend about 48, 49%, more or less half the time, managing operational work. And then we're able to spend about 35% on projectized work, and then we lose about 15% to administrative. And right, that's PTO, that's other leave time that happens, that's team meetings that aren't necessarily directed towards projects or operational work. And we're able to identify also in this right section here, which projects or which activities are taking the most time. You can add an additional feature that also highlights or tightens it down to be, say, look at the past 2 to 4 weeks, and that'll tell you what people are working on in that span. And then also allow you to understand, are they working on the right things? Should they be reprioritizing some items and spending more time in one place or another? Additionally, to the top there, you see the OBS box. Going back to the organizational breakdown, we're able to carve off to look at individual teams, and we can have an individual conversation with each of them to understand their capacity, to make sure that they are understanding what they're reporting as well, so that we can have a conversation about future planning. So each team's a little bit different. If you have a help desk, they're going to be heavily operational. And so you need to be able to understand that. All the same, if you have developers, they're going to be heavily projectized. So you can look at the individual roles and teams and depict on how much percentage of time they're using in that space. And that lets you have the conversation again with business, because they're always looking for new work, new projects. But you can say, we can only give you 35% of our annual capacity, and look at those components and have that conversation with them over what we can and cannot get done. Diving a little deeper from an internal management perspective, from a team level capacity plan. Again, this is another Hammerhead report that we've expanded on. So from that, we're able to break out the individual teams that we have and look at their individual capacities. And you can see the reds, the whites, and the greens. And the reds and the greens, of course, highlight where they don't have capacity and where they do have capacity. So we can look at this on a month-to-month basis. And I'll say, right, resource planning, given that education curve that I talked about, we're still on the journey of getting this quote right, or right sizing this to our organization and learning what that is for each team on each level. As mentioned, you can see kind of the pluses and minuses in the lower blue box there. If you hit the plus sign on each of these teams, we can actually carve out and see the roles for each of them. So while it may be misleading, let's using merchandising systems as an example, it may be misleading that they're underwater by 225 hours. You can expand that and say, okay, I have a couple roles that are underwater, but I have other roles that have capacity. so I can still get some other things done if I need to get done. Or two, also the people that are underwater, we need to expand on that and figure out who's drowning, and we need to save them or reallocate some work. And that allows us to do it with analytics versus those feelings that I talked about earlier. A couple tips and tricks or comments around the resource planning. Connecting tables in Power BI can be tricky, and connecting those between tasking, resources, and timesheets. They're all separate tables and separate data points, and they don't natively connect. So I just forewarn, right? If you get into it and you get into the weeds, make sure that you're validating your data to make sure you're pulling the right content you're looking for. Initially, we pulled in and we thought we were all groovy and green, and then we found out we were pulling kind of the wrong data point, pulled in the right one, and then we had some work to do. Same thread as far as the resource table and the timesheet table in particular, making sure that you have the right points in this. If you're using actual work, make sure you're using the right actual field from the right table for the right report that you're trying to get. And then the last point there, task actual time lesson. When you're using Project Web Access, make sure that you're zeroing out remaining time before you mark a task 100% complete. When you mark it 100% complete, PWA adds the remaining actual time or the remaining plan time to actual time. This kind of compounds the first two conversations, right? This is a big lesson learned for us, is making sure that you get the right process in place to close out a task, removing the remaining hours, then marking 100%, and then making sure that you're getting that update to the right tables. If you don't do it, you will inflate your reports and you'll wonder why your project closed at 20,000 hours on a 5,000 hour project because it added all the remaining work that wasn't needed. From a PWA hack, more or less an org chart hack. So we were able to use PWA in the resourcing table to export to Excel. We then loaded up Visio and used their organizational chart feature to load in all our resources. And if you have your OBS structured right, then it prints out a nice, pretty org chart for you. We do this now on a monthly basis. So as people move around and get added and removed from our resourcing pool, our org chart is automatically updated. You should have, of course, if you're working with your HR team, they have plenty of org charts for you, but they don't always capture contractors, especially in our position. So this is a way that we can look at our entire org group and see how many people we have and where they are, or who they report to. From a tools perspective, as mentioned early on, we connected our teams and SharePoint sites. We want to make sure that we had data flowing back and forth and sourcing both groups. And we put this into practice in our own team. So our own team has a SharePoint site and a Teams channel, and the content flows back and forth. The reports go back and forth. All the content is connected. And on the SharePoint site, you can, of course, organize it in different ways and link to different folders. But you can see here, we got different folders for each of the groups. And then at the bottom side of our SharePoint site, we put direct links for timesheet allocations, recalling your timesheet, and all the other reports we also publish from a regular basis. We found that many people were looking for those links on a regular basis and thumbing through Power BI. And we found it was easy just to give them a kind of an Amazon one-stop shop. Come to the PMO and you can get all the information that you need in an organized fashion. And that worked out for them. As far as where we're headed, you've probably heard it enough from me over the past few slides. Resourcing, resourcing, resourcing. We're trying to understand our groups, understand where we're spending time. There are more activities coming our way than we can handle. So we need to have constant conversations about what are the priorities that we're working on, where time is being spent. So we're going to continue to work in that environment. And then to that point around Agile, we do also work with Azure DevOps and use the ADO platform for our Agile framework. And so we're looking to pull in the Agile allocations and the burn charts and some of those features to understand a little bit more about how we're using our teams holistically. And then going to that, we're going to be using Azure DevOps and tying it into a PWA roadmap feature. So there's an additional feature from Project and PWA where you can combine both roadmaps of Project and Azure DevOps. And so we're going to be looking to tie those together. So again, we get the holistic program portfolio view. We can see everything that we're working on, see those prioritizations, and again, communicate that to our business partners. Because if you show them one report, but you only show them half the picture, then you're not telling them the whole story, or they're not getting the understanding and value out of what you're providing to them. So we're tying those things together to show them everything we're working on so that we can also, again, show them the progress that we're making. And then the last item there is around portfolio optimization. As mentioned, we do annual planning. We also have 5-year roadmap development plans, and we're going to be using the portfolio optimization features going forward to start learning how to build our selections. So as we go into annual planning, which projects have the highest ROI, which ones have the highest expense or the highest resource or cost, or understanding with that balance between those, which ones align to strategy better. So we're going to be using that portfolio optimization feature in the next cycle, which will be exciting to see and for us to develop. And to kind of wrap it up, Kaizen, right? Constantly improving, constantly changing. The world is changing around us. We have to change with them. So we've embraced this from the Southeastern Grocers, IT, and the PMO sectors. That we're going to constantly be changing and working and improving. So this is not where our journey stops. This is where our journey starts.